In the modern day landscape of the gaming community, criticism seems to be a thorny topic regardless of which side of the aisle that you're on. On the reviewer side, you can get absolute shit for having a different opinion than the general masses for larger releases, even if the players haven't actually played the game yet. And in that same breath, those same viewers will complain about how high scores are nowadays. Then you have the general gaming consumer, getting more and more critical advertising, as Twitch streams sometimes fail to disclose advertising correctly, and YouTube reviews and content usually are rushing out content to make deadlines and maybe overlooking major flaws with games, or not even trying to look at a game objectively, not disclosing specific biases to help the consumer understand where they fit into the review's picture, because that's not as entertaining. And then you have game developers, sometimes getting review bombed for some of the most insane things in retrospective, or being asked to put features that have nothing to do with the game's vision into the game because a majority of people want it, regardless of the cost. Even then, there's caveats there. Sometimes it is for good reason and doesn't actually go against the game's vision. I can think of accessibility options there. While others, yeah, they're strictly against it. And then there's of course the middle ground. Haha, yes. That word, the middle. The seemingly forgotten lexicon of the modern day discussion. See, everything nowadays is about the extreme when it comes to the viability of most everything in this space. Sure, there are more toned down things that get some spotlights, but don't tell me that's not the case when these guys are at the top of the space in their respective fields. In some spaces, it's only slightly damaging, but in others, especially in the realm of game design, it can be catastrophic, especially if that criticism is wrong on a fundamental level. Those bad assumptions can present the game to a wrong audience, or scare off people that would actually love the game. Hell, disappoint those who are actually looking for the bad assumption in the first place and it doesn't actually fulfill their needs. Those lines where assumptions are made, however, are some of the most difficult things in criticism to nail down at times. Very easy to misinterpret them if you're missing even the slightest bit of information, even for the most seasoned of veterans. I mean, that's the thing. When emotion is involved in the critical nature of the medium, you're always gonna get this issue. It's part of what makes art so difficult to grade in an objective scale at times, even when there's objective elements to it. That's why I always huff at the idea that things are ever easy when it comes to gaming, especially when it comes to gaming criticism. Yes, anyone can give an opinion on a game on whether they liked it or not. That's not something that you can objectively come to a conclusion on. The fact is, they liked it or they didn't. But the best critics not only are able to understand what works for the game that they played, but they are able to see if specific audiences would like a game based on particular traits, and are able to break down why certain design decisions could work or not. At the core of all of that is actually one concept that is usually overlooked in the big picture: the target audience, and the intent and perception surrounding that. The basic ideas of what audience the game developers and designers were attempting to design the game for, what subset of the massive audience that could exist within a single genre, and if the perception of that intent was correctly received by those buying the game and the reviewers who end up covering them. And if that happens, whether they succeeded in terms of delivering that audience the product. A game in recent history that is a great example of this dilemma is the recently released game Skatebird. On the surface, many people will see a game that's boiled down to a simple idea: a skateboarding game with a bird instead of a human. And that's correct, that basic idea. But it's what the implication of expectations of that concept in where the disconnect starts to form between some of the audience and the actual game. When the mass majority think of a skateboard game, they think of the flagship franchise of the skateboard subgenre, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. So of course, some players on the surface will make a quick assumption that Skatebird is an indie Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, but with birds. That you'll be using your bird to perform massive tricks, do submissions, and rack up a big score as possible. And that would be a dangerous assumption because that's definitely not the game that Skatebird is trying to be. Don't get me wrong, it's definitely influenced by the Tony Hawk franchise. The presence of missions like collecting 5 letters spelling out skate, and the presence of a legally distinct yet referential nod to Tony Hawk is a prime example of that. But the developer has been clear that this is not Tony Hawk with birds. It's not what Skatebird is trying to be. It's trying to be a cute little laid-back skateboarding title that has been influenced by the genre, but it's still trying to be its own thing. Well, Dragnix, how do you know that? Read the store description of the game. Sure, one reference is made control-wise to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, which yes, opens it up to some criticism. But notice the store page and how it really is about exploring with your bird, finding clothing, doing little quests, not the actual gameplay. The fact is, if you were expecting Tony Hawk's Pro Skater and that level of gameplay here, and you bought this game thinking that, that's sort of on you. Yet, it's an interesting case, as that same generic assumption is also being used to defend it. Those people who don't like the game are just expecting too much of it, and those people giving bad grades to the game just don't get Skatebird. That certain people just wanted a version of the game that they loved, and they're just being haters, which in some cases I would agree with, but that's only to a point. And herein lies the clash of thoughts. How do you deal with intent? Does intent matter? Yes, absolutely, but how do you critically take a look at features in a game and determine if a design of any singular element is reinforcing the intent in question? The fact is, you can always make the argument, oh, it was designed that way. Well, yes, you can, but there are ways to actually determine whether or not something actually works. That's what I want to focus on in this video essay. See, while Skatebird does have a vastly divided opinion on its quality, I want to show you a couple of examples of mechanics in the game, and how I as a critic would go about looking at them, how I attempt to understand the intent of the mechanics, how I view them, and how I determine whether or not the mechanic was successful. Now, of course that's partly an opinion, but I want to show how even the most simple of concepts do have things that can be thought about even at that simple level, even if it seems obvious, and how you can still make valid criticisms while not absolutely blowing things out of proportion. I'll be looking at 3 examples of this, starting with a simple feature, but then going to a mid-level one, and then finally, a very complex one. Let's start with this mission here. My job in this quest is simple. I'm supposed to chill out by relaxing on the bed. I do that by falling off my board and rolling around, hitting predetermined spots on the bed. We've seen this in other games, a basic follow the path structure that has a time limit associated with it quest. Simple, right? And on the surface, it's a relaxing quest in its own way, giving you unconventional controls for what you're used to, and making you adjust to a new set of them. Several games have this, and it works. But you may be seeing one of my first criticisms here right away, or more specifically, not able to see. See, determining where the next checkpoint is can be difficult due to the color shade that's chosen to mark an overall checkpoint here. Now that's a universal color scheme of light blue, and it pops out easily when put against a dark hue in earlier levels. But on this white sheet, it blends in thanks to similar properties of brightness and basic color theory. In essence, this is a problem for a player to see even when we don't consider elements like color blindness into it. Now, you're probably sitting here going, okay, Dragnix, how is intent even supposed to play into this idea? I mean, this is black and white, right? This is just bad design at default. You can't see where you need to go. Not so fast. Let's consider an option. What if our assumption of the mission and its purpose was wrong? That it was not simply to go through a series of checkpoints in a timely manner. What if finding the checkpoints was the challenge in itself? I mean, you may scoff at that, but other games do find the item in the environment. I mean, hell, that's the whole hidden object genre in itself. Yes, they may be hard to see, but you can see them if you look closely. And when I think about it, the Steam store page for the game does indicate that exploration is a big part of it. And this is a part of exploration, being able to find your surroundings. So, was the assumption that I made regarding the design being bad wrong? Those, however, who weren't just listening to my words and were looking at the screen may point out the obvious flaw in that assumption. See, let's assume that trying to find the checkpoints is a major aspect of the mission here and that the color was purposeful. Well, it's completely contradicted by the bird here. This is a compass that points you to the next checkpoint. It's used in all missions with some sort of collectible checkpoint element, but it contradicts the intent that we assumed, because it literally points to the next checkpoint. Any challenge of seeing the environment can easily be negated by looking at this and going to where it points. Thus, it contradicts the intent, and thus is probably not the actual intent in this case. Now, with that assumption gone, we can attempt to come up with different explanations, but after thinking about it, I couldn't come up with one. So I can say that the intent of this mission does not likely match up with its implementation on the checkpoints, and a different design should have been chosen. And that's still dependent on the intent though. If it is just finding the checkpoints that was the intent and not camouflaging into the environment, then changing the checkpoint to be a different color for this mission would be a sufficient design change. Whatever element in C#, as this is Unity I believe, that places the checkpoint could have a parameter to determine what color it is, or a light-dark parameter to indicate whether it should be on a light or dark shade depending on the background. That would help give the player information vital to be able to perform this task without much other consequences. But if it is the other intent, the one where you want to actually camouflage it, then disabling the compass may be an option. Now, you could still argue that it should be easier to see than in the actual, regular implementation, but nevertheless, it is a solution and can be a chosen option by the developer. It would be whether or not that intention would be fun in the big picture, and honestly, I do think number 1 is a better option than number 2. But in most cases, there is a lacking element in the mission here, and thus, I would criticize it to show how the game can be improved. Alright, so I've shown a smaller scale problem that has a more precise solution. But let's take on an issue that's a little bit more complicated and doesn't necessarily have such a clean and dry answer for the next one. One of the things I noticed early in the game was that I was falling a little bit more than I was expecting. Granted, I haven't played a skateboarding game in a while, but especially in the first few hours, I found myself falling a bit more than I was expecting. This was like riding a bike in a certain sense. Then I realized something. Maybe part of the problem was actually something core to the experience. In fact, let me pause this footage mid-clip and see if you spot the problem. I'll give you a few seconds. Give up? Okay, it's this. Yes, I'm talking about the bird model. Yes, I'm saying that part of the problem is the actual basic premise behind Skatebird, the bird part of it. Let me be more specific, however. It's a certain combination of the bird and particular clothing items in most cases, along with the moveset. Okay, so what the hell am I talking about? Well, let's start with the problem I'm referring to, falling off the board when coming down the half pipe. The biggest cause for this is simple. It's now routing your board to be at the appropriate angle when you come down. For example, if you go up at a perpendicular angle from the half pipe, you should be returning at approximately the same angle on the way down, with a leeway of a few degrees. If you go off at an angle from the half pipe, your return angle should be similar on the way down, depending on where you're going. If you hit outside the acceptable leeway, your board won't hit the half pipe properly, and it will cause you to bail off your board. So positioning your bird is important to your success, and if you're not able to do that on a regular basis, you will fall more often. Now, you do have control of your bird's rotation in the air when coming back down, so positioning the bird properly shouldn't be a problem if you give yourself a reasonable amount of time when you start your corrections. Now, there's a lot of ways to set this up, but of course one of the primary ones is noticing where the skateboard wheels are and the front of the board are pointing as you come down. I mean, if I literally make a line, it shows you where it should be going in terms of the angle, and remembering that angle when you started should give you the idea of how you should come down. So using the actual board as a visual reference to make possible corrections in the early going is a smart move, and it's something that people used in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater as well. And most certainly there are other ways to actually do this. You can get a hang of the timing and your rotation, and it will sort of become second nature over time. But in the early going, the visual cue is a very important tool for the player. And at times in Skatebird, I definitely had problems seeing it. Particularly, I noticed when performing grabs with the bird that touched the front of my deck, and with certain combinations of birds and cosmetics, that I was really having a problem, that I couldn't see how my board was coming down on the half pipe. Herein lies the theoretical problem to consider, specifically in the case of Skatebird, especially when you consider the model compared to a normal human model. How is the bird different? Well, let's compare a sample human model on a skateboard compared to the bird. You'll notice a couple things here. First, a typical human is not wider than his board. That's not the case with our plumpy friend here. That means where the bird is standing, you may not see the board's bottom itself. And that means in the air, at certain angles, your bird may be taking up more space of the board for reference to use. But as long as the board's end is viewable, it shouldn't be a problem, right? Well, let's also consider the grab. When a human grabs the end of the board for a trick, he uses his arm. Like with the human and the board itself, this arm should not overtake the board in terms of visuals, so you can still see the wheels and the actual skateboard. Unless you're literally skating with Popeye the Skater Boy. But the bird, it uses its beak and its head, which can block the entire view of the board for reference. Now you may say to yourself, well wait, hold on the grab one. He'll grab it at the same angle that the board is going. Alright, let's take a look. As you can see here, if we were to draw the same line that we did with the viewable board, we get the same angle pretty much. So we should be fine, right? Well, let's look at both of them together. Notice how much thicker the bird's line is. That does actually make a difference when you're trying to calculate the angle in your head or try to match it up, because there's a little bit more leeway in terms of getting the angle right. The thicker the line, the harder it's going to be in terms of your eye and your internal calculations that may not necessarily be math, but sort of a, visual point of reference. It's going to be a little bit harder for you to get that precision that you're going to want. If you want a 15-degree angle in terms of how you're coming down, you may be more likely to do a 12-degree or a 14-degree angle more than that 15-degree with the thicker head and the thicker line, rather than the smaller board, because you have a bigger point of reference. Which means it could be a little bit harder to make that calculation or that sort of estimation in your head on the fly. But let's assume that you're able to do that perfectly and with no problems. And let's add another element to it, the cosmetics that I mentioned before. I'm going to use an extreme example to sort of get my point across here. Let's look at this wonderful ensemble for the bird here, and focus on the cupcake skirt. If we compared the slowdown clips of a bird with a cupcake skirt during a rotational trick versus one without it, you'll notice how hard it is to see the board with the cupcake skirt versus the one without it throughout the trick. Now just imagine it sped up. It's taking up such a larger section of space that angle that you're trying to calculate in your head or trying to, feel out, it's a little bit harder. So if we need to correct some of that space due to that visual reference, we may have more trouble doing it on a consistent basis. So am I saying that the birds and cosmetics are a problem and should never have been implemented due to the gameplay design? No, in fact, I'd argue strongly against it. I mean, let's refer to that Steam store page again, and that intent that I harped on early in the video. One of the intents is to skate with cute birds and with different cosmetics. It's literally right there. If that's an intent, then taking out those fun ideas, like the cupcake skirt, even if it causes some problems, would drag that element of the game down. And the fact is that one of Skatebird's biggest strengths is how creative it gets with the elements of its bird. Seeing what has been adapted not only on the bird itself, but in the environment is part of the fun here in terms of the exploration. And that would definitely be a problem if we took that out of the game. So, this is a problem that's a bit harder to solve at first glance, you see. And it seems like these two elements may conflict with each other at the base and core of the game design. You could argue that the cosmetics shouldn't get in the way of the gameplay, and you could argue that the player should get used to the timing even with the cosmetics. You could make a lot of different arguments. But here's the question. Is there a way to have both at the same time? Well, actually, there is. We've in fact seen a solution be used in other games, but maybe not necessarily the same genre. We've seen it seen in racing games. What if in the air, we made the bird a little bit more transparent? Specifically, the bird himself transparent enough so that we can still see the bird and his cosmetics, but we can clearly see the non-transparent board as well. This solution seems to solve things on the surface. You still get the presentation elements of the cosmetics that the store page puts forward in most cases, but it allows you to see what's going on with the bird in the air and it doesn't drag it down. It seems to get the best of both worlds. Now granted, this is not necessarily an airtight solution. The transition from the transparency to non-transparency as the bird hits the half pipe is important, as that transition could be jarring and cause the player to react negatively when it happens, especially on the half pipe. You would want to test that functionality with a wide variety of different people to see how they react, and here lies the indie game problem that develops here. You may not have those numbers in order to implement something like that. Sure, you can get your 15-20 friends to be able to tell you exactly what they think, but it's going to take a lot more numbers to see if the general gaming public will be able to deal with it. And that's why this solution isn't necessarily airtight, and how you have to realize that sooner or later one of these points may have to give. And so it's a problem, but it's a problem with not a 100% solution, at least in my mind. So okay, I gave you a mid-level problem with a mid-level solution, showing that at times, features can clash even in the best of circumstances. But those who have been following me on social media or in my Discord, link below, know that there was a point in playing this game where I almost broke. That I was so frustrated with the game that I almost walked away from it. And this is coming from someone who backed the game on Kickstarter. With all the things that have been leveled at the game from a critical standpoint, from the initial implementation of the camera, that has been fixed, to it not being the next Tony Hawk game. Some of those points are fair and some of them are not, but none of them came close to the biggest problem in my mind. One that I wanted to yell at OBS for, because while all my other footage with the same settings recorded just fine, this one did not, and I'll have to recreate the footage for the purposes of this point. So, what is the bane of my existence in this game? What almost made me walk away from the game in frustration? This. Yep, that's it. These two little half pipes right here. These two magazines were the bane of my existence. Well, okay, it's not just them. It's a specific quest you have to do with them. You grab a pair of scissors, get to the half pipes and perform a series of tricks only in those half pipes before the time runs out. Simple, right? Right? Right?
Going down the road feeling bad. I'm going down the road feeling bad. Going down the road feeling bad. I ain't gonna be treated this way. My heroes are giant piles of trash. All my heroes are giant piles of trash. My heroes are giant piles of trash, and they ain't gonna.
You know what's funny about all this? I never actually successfully succeeded in this mission either. I beat the game, mind you, and again, I wish I didn't have unscrewed up footage to show you what happened. But essentially, the game glitched out getting to the quest, and randomly awarded me 241,000 points for falling off my board before I even was in the area that I was supposed to succeed on, and it gave me the quest. It just gave it to me. Yes, that's right, I didn't even actually beat this challenge. Which makes me even a little bit more angry when I think about it. Okay, so you're probably telling me that I should get good and that others beat it. They beat the game. What are you complaining about? What did you do wrong, Dragnix? Get good. Well, I'm here to tell you that while my skill can always be questioned, I mean, just take a look at any gameplay that I have on Twitch, there's fundamental problems with the design of this quest, and it all has to do with the level design. Specifically, how different these half pipes are compared to the others in the game. In fact, just for reference, let's take a side-by-side comparison of several of the different half pipes in the game right now. You'll notice that there's a wide variety of them. Long ones, short ones, oblong ones. But this one right here, I'm telling you, is the worst of the bunch, and it all has to do with the fundamental gameplay design at the core of Skatebird, and most skateboarding games in general, that I'm going to break down more scientifically here. That this pipe goes way too far in pushing the game design and level design to the point where the player is just wanting to punch someone in the face. So the core gameplay for obtaining score on a half pipe is as follows. Go up the half pipe, do some sort of trick, whether it be grinding and stopping at the top of the half pipe, or doing kickflips and grabs in the air before coming back down. Then either exit the half pipe and get the points, or go to the other side of the pipe to keep the loop going, or some kind of trick to keep everything going. Rinse and repeat as needed. It's a simple ebb and flow. To understand my problem with the design, let's focus on some key elements in that formula. First, I want to start with 2 points, which I will call the adjustment point and the point of no return on the half pipe. And this is specifically dealing with when you come back down on the half pipe. As you hit the half pipe from the air again, you will need to allow your bird to hit the pipe on the way down cleanly, and not do any real actions to allow them to hit it cleanly. Doing an action at that point would cause the bird to bail. But once you've let that time elapse, you've hit what I call the adjustment point. This is the point in which the player can now decide to change their current trajectory on the half pipe, keep the current one they have, or leave the half pipe altogether. This is the point where you move your bird to hit the pipe maybe with a more perpendicular angle, for example. And this point is important, as it helps to deal with the problems that can arise from small mistakes on the half pipe. If you get too close to an edge due to the X factor of your velocity taking you too close to the edge of the pipe, this point will allow you to move back towards the other side so you don't do that. Now, on the other side of the coin, there's also a point of no return. As you start to go up the pipe, depending on your velocity, there's a point as you make it up the pipe that you can perform other actions up to it. But once you hit that point, you'll need to assume you'll be hitting the air and start setting up your next set of tricks. If you try to bail after that point, you'll end up probably screwing up, getting air anyway, and probably crashing. Now these 2 points are changing based on a few factors, and one of them is velocity. The faster you go up and down the pipe, the quicker you'll have to make a decision, as you stay on the same pipe in most cases. And that's down to simple physics. The distance you are traveling most likely is staying the same. As your bird gains speed, it's traveling the distance in a shorter amount of time. Simple physics equation here, folks. The other factor is, of course, the half-pipe's construction, and where I want to focus on right now. So the aforementioned distance from the point of adjustment and no return is going to be based on that speed and the construction of the pipe. Wider pipes, for example, will have a longer distance to travel between these points, giving the player ample time to adjust. The angle of the curve of the pipe will also make a difference, as being able to bail is easier at less steep angles of curves. Now let's look at our problem child here and compare it to others. The curve in which the magazines are bent is pretty high compared to most of the other half pipes, and noticing how the distance of the flat ground of the magazine, it's basically nothing. That means that, based on speed, the points of no return and adjustment are relatively close to each other, and even get closer as speed goes up. So the player has less and less time to adjust as the bird gains speed, if they even can in the structure. Notice how that there's not really a clean way to get into the structure either, meaning that you're probably not gaining a whole lot of speed before really getting going on the pipe, which can be a blessing and a curse at the same time. So I'll reiterate, as you gain speed on this pipe, you'll have less and less time to react, which in itself could be fine. I mean, the rhythm of this game, the sort of ebb and flow of the half pipe, is what makes the game a challenge to begin with. But where this particular element fails is in another place: the width of the half pipes. See, when it comes to the adjustment point, you're making an adjustment to either stay on the half pipe or not. Part of this has to do with not only the speed, but specifically the velocity as you come down into the adjustment point of what you want to do, especially due to the actual rotation that happens in the air. Now, you're not always going to hit the half pipe at the angle at 100% accuracy that you want, especially in the early going of the game. That means you'll be going directions that you may not want to go when you come back down, but that's okay. You'll have time and room to adjust. But now let's consider this evil half pipe here. So let's stop the clip right here, and let me draw a few example paths of where my bird could go depending on how I came down the half pipe. And here they are. There's 5 of them, for the sake of an example. If my bird was to come down the pipe straight, it would go up straight, and no adjustments would be needed if I wanted to keep on the half pipe. I could continue to hit the pipes normally and keep my combo going as seen here. But you probably aren't doing any rotations, unless if you're a master and hitting 180, 180, 180, and you'll need that rotation to be able to keep the combo going, because the different types of tricks will keep the multiplier going up. Okay, but let's say I screwed up ever so slightly and hit the pipe at a very small angle to the right, this line here. If you follow the line and make no corrections, this is what would happen. I would go up and come down, very close to the edge of the half pipe. As I come down in the scenario, notice what happens if I now apply that same logic to this one. Notice how a whole section of the pipe is not available to me in this case, because I'd immediately hit the wall. Sure, I could bounce off the wall in this case possibly, but I could also just bail because I hit an actual surface. So really, the amount of choices I have to actually recover my sort of combo is small. Alright, let's rewind back. What about an even bigger angle? Well, look at this. I'm screwed. I go up and literally am out of the pipe, and that basically means my combo is over most likely and that I've bailed. Now, that's the third one. Let's look at the 4th and 5th one. Let's consider the smaller angle to the left. I go up it and come back down. I'm making my way to what is basically the open air above the other half pipe if I follow this line coming back down. There is a possibility of transition here, but it's actually small. It really depends on the speed I'm leaving the pipe at in order to adjust to. And it's possible, and better than actually hitting the other wall, but still can lead to us bailing if we don't really hit it with precision. And that's even more true with the bigger angle going to the right here. Notice how many of these scenarios end up with a problem outcome. Now let's take the same scenarios and maybe look at a different half pipe. Let's apply the same logic to the pipes down below, but there's some different scenarios that develop here. This one is very similar to the first scenario, but this line in particular is a bit more problem due to the fact that bailing out this way basically means your quest is halted. And remember, one of the key elements of the quest is to stay within the bounds. You go this way, yeah, you may get points. No, you're not, because you've lost because you've gone out of the actual half pipe. Oh, did I not mention that? Yeah, you have to stay in the area. So even if you go outside the half pipe, going in that little area, that little alcove, will actually make you lose the quest, and you'll have to start all over again. You don't know how many times I started this quest over because I went a little bit over, and then there we go, it's done. Now, you may be saying to yourself, okay, Dragnix, are you saying that every half pipe should be the same? No, in fact, one of the biggest strengths of Skatebird is the different half pipe constructions. Adjusting to a new half pipe and how it changes the distance, velocity, and adjustment is actually a really smart move on the dev's part. There's an adjustment gameplay there that can really work. Take this half pipe here. It offers a few different challenges, especially hitting this section right here. You gotta make sure that you don't go over this lip or you're going to trip. But notice how there's still a lot of room for me to work with. And even if I get to the right section here, I can adjust myself and sort of make my way back to the left rather easily without getting myself in trouble. What I'm saying is though, is that the construction of these elements should still have a minimum combination of width and distance of those aforementioned points, or the human player and their reaction time isn't going to be able to handle it cleanly. And now comes the whole get good part of the video. Yes, less experienced players and less skilled players will get more frustrated in this section, and in particular will have trouble figuring out what they were doing wrong. Even if they do, they still have a precision that the game really hasn't asked for up to this point. And there's a big caveat here. Most of the missions in this game are necessary to continue on, and I think this one is too. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure it is. And what complicates this more is the level of precision based on the visual elements. Let's face it, it can be hard to figure out the difference from a 3-degree angle coming down versus a 6-degree angle at first glance. And it may be harder for the player to figure out what they are necessarily doing wrong in terms of rotation, trick timing, hell, even the timing of the jump to get more air at the end. This particular half pipe gave me so much trouble, especially because I'd end up jumping out of it to get more air off the pipe right as I just left, which would usually cause me to jump out of the half pipe entirely. And I almost thought the half pipe was broken until it was me realizing that I was jumping late. The point I'm trying to make is that even in the case of trying a series of different half pipes and different challenges, that I believe based on the physics of how the gameplay mechanic works, that this half pipe goes too far in testing precision skills and the frustration factor of the player. It goes so far to the point where I would advise to change it specifically, because there's not really a good way to overcome the challenge without causing more frustration, and frustration that I don't think is not necessarily necessary, but positive. There is frustration in things like Dark Souls, where you go at things over and over again, and you eventually get over it. Here, you keep on going at it, and you just don't feel like you're going anywhere. And it really comes down to the fundamental level design of this half pipe. Now, many regulars of the channel may wonder, what was the point of making this video of this length on game design, and not just reviewing Skatebird and pointing some of my complaints out, even if I included the design perspectives? Well, it comes to the opening of this video. Criticism is something that is an extremely useful tool for these creators, whether it be game designers or even reviewers like myself, to refine their craft and make something incredible, polish it to a shine, and then create something even better the next time around, if not, refine the product as now. And while it may not affect the modern day AAA title as much, that criticism is the lifeblood of the indie game community. But the landscape of the criticism community right now, when it comes to modern culture, doesn't reward that. It rewards over-the-top reactions. It rewards absolutely burning hot takes, regardless of whether or not that actually helps the game or not. And that's the problem. The modern take on game reviews seems to be that they've gotten worse over time. But really, there's a ton of great criticism out there. You have to look for it. It's not the criticism that will grab headlines, though. It's not going to be the epic dunk on a game that's going to really push this medium forward. It's a rational look on both sides of issues and understanding when a game can be great and when it can be improved. My plea to all of you is one simple thing. Before you post that, "Oh, that shit is incredibly bad," or "This developer absolutely sucked at implementing this," wait a second, and take a step back. Reconsider if you are looking at the feature and the game in a way that forces it to suck. That maybe your perception of things is off, and that it is good for something, but not maybe for you. That maybe, just maybe, it's just a game that doesn't fill your wants, and pass that information on, but don't just go for the throat. And please, if you want criticism to get better, if you want design to get better, challenge yourself. Take a game that you didn't like and go watch reviews that you may not have watched before. Maybe it's the third page of YouTube results that has a review that you see a different light of the game. Look at the game in a different way. Maybe it doesn't change your original perception, but maybe you can understand that, okay, that game wasn't for me, but maybe it is for someone else. And maybe it'll open you to a whole new world of gaming. Maybe it's a different type of genre or a different play style. That's how we improve. That's how we get those review scores to mean something nowadays. We can't just go to the big guys. We can't just go to the ones that make the biggest claims. You gotta be willing to go in the dirt, I guess, and find the actual gold that is under it. Anyway, that was a long video for a game design video. I understand. I know that many of you probably didn't make this far. The next video will be a first impressions, even though I played like 70 hours of it, of Rogue Lords, and then we'll see. Anyway, this is Dragnix signing out, and as always, keep on gaming. And not making 44-minute game design reviews.